Hello, friend, and welcome back to the Writer's Toolbox. Today, we're going to dive into our next writing tool, cause and effect, and discuss methods for sorting out events in time and possibly predicting for the future. We'll generate our own causal webs and consider sources rather than symptoms, consequences, catalysts, feedback loops, and other variables that make cause and effect much more nuanced than most people care to consider. To consider a causal web, let's take a look at the example that I review with my English 101 students each semester, a climate change web. Because climate change is a big, global, in fact, issue, we can explore every consideration of a causal web by discussing this phenomenon. Let's start our web with our central node, climate change, and ask some of our central questions when discussing cause and effect. Why did it happen? And how did it happen? Consider the difference between these two questions, why and how. My students typically respond that why considers ethical implications, moral incentives, or personal values that enable a person or group of people to take an action. So, asking why climate change is happening, we might respond with answers like consumer culture or capitalism, two predominant cultural systems that urge people to use increasingly and wasteful amounts of goods and services, such as fossil fuels, to maintain a healthy economy. My students delineate why from how by explaining that how is the more mechanical, measurable, quantifiable aspects of the process, kind of like the discrete steps in a how-to guide. So, asking how climate change happens, we might generate a chain that looks like this. People burn fossil fuels like oil and gas to power their lives. Burning fossil fuels emits greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. Those gases trap the sun's heat and raise global temperatures, like when the windows are rolled up in your car on a hot day. After that, our web gets more complicated than we can cover in this short video, because the Earth is a complex system where everything is connected and changes in one area can influence changes in all others. In short, though, raising temperatures cause malfunctions all over the Earth's system, just like a fever wreaks havoc in different systems in a human body. The consequences of climate change now include, among others, intense droughts, rising sea levels, flooding, and so on. After we've broken down our how and our why, we can start considering other important aspects of the web. Let's start with immediate and remote causes and effects. Immediate causes and effects are those closest to our central bubble. Remote causes and effects are those farther away, the ultimate sources or consequences of an issue or phenomenon that we might not consider without constructing a detailed web. When drafting strategies for change, disruption, or adoption of a causal web, understanding these remote causes and effects is essential. Remote causes can also be drawn out or predicted for the future. If we can draw evidence, possibly from historical precedent, and explain the process of our predictions in detail, we can make compelling predictions. Let's imagine we want to predict future effects of climate change. We might begin by examining the typical damaging effects of extreme weather on resource production. We could consider next historical examples of unrest and conflict caused by resource scarcity, or more positive outcomes. Here, our predictions diverge, and we can make a case for either, depending on how we assume modern people will react to the current climate crisis. Let's consider next major and minor or contributory causes and effects. In order to assess some major or minor contributors, let's break down this node in our web and ask how we use fossil fuels to power our lives. The Environmental Protection Agency reports that transportation, burning fuels for our cars, trucks, ships, trains, and planes, generates the most greenhouse gases. In other words, transportation is a major contributor. In contrast, one of the more minor causes is residential use of energy, burning fossil fuels to light, heat, and cool our homes. Again, when considering the best action plans to adopt, dismantle, or modify current causal webs, considering the major and minor causes is essential. To return to our example, trying to ride your bike or buy locally sourced products may help reduce emissions more than turning off the faucet when you brush your teeth. Let's consider next a feedback loop. To illustrate a feedback loop, let's take a look at this effect, rising sea levels, in more detail. When temperatures rise, ice melts. Specifically, glaciers and polar ice caps melt. When ice melts, we get more water and less ice. Ice is typically white and reflects heat. Water is typically dark and absorbs heat. Think of touching dark asphalt versus lighter concrete in the summer. More water on Earth means more heat is absorbed, which raises temperatures. Raising temperatures melt more ice, and we've come full circle. The causal loop feeds itself, so we call it a feedback loop. Let's consider next indirect causes and effects. To illustrate, when we emit greenhouse gases, specifically carbon dioxide, we heat the planet. But this carbon dioxide has another unexpected or unintended side effect, an indirect effect. It dissolves into the ocean. The carbon dioxide in the ocean then interacts chemically with water to ultimately produce an acidic marine environment. Though we might not file this ocean acidification under climate change caused by increasing global temperatures, this indirect effect of burning fossil fuels is still worth considering while drafting an action plan to tackle climate change. Let's consider catalysts next. A catalyst is something or someone who speeds up a causal chain. For example, fracking is a method of extracting some fossil fuels. Fracking itself releases large amounts of greenhouse gases and further speeds up the process of climate change compared to other extraction methods. Because this method speeds up the process, we can call it a catalyst. All right, before we finish, let's consider some of the pitfalls of cause and effect analysis. First, beware of the post hoc fallacy. Just because one event precedes another, that doesn't make them related. Typically, when we consider cause and effect, we consider trends, events, or sources that concur to draw causal relationships. If we look at climate change data that shows us temperatures began increasing in the 1880s, we can consider other trends that began in the 1880s. Well, the first Women's Rights Convention was held in 1848, and women have been advocating for their rights ever since. Drawing a causal relationship between these two trends, though, would lead you to a post hoc fallacy. To avoid this type of logical error, be sure you support each step of your causal web with evidence and a detailed analysis of process. If I could find evidence that suggested that advocating for women's rights caused massive amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, and if I could explain the process by which women consumed vast quantities of fossil fuels to drive their independence movement, well, then I might have a solid argument. Without that evidence, though, I have nothing but a post hoc fallacy. Beware as well of oversimplification. In our quick and convenient digital world, we love to get the gist of a situation, apply solutions, and move on. To capably assess complex cause and effect web, though, we have to consider any event, phenomenon, or issue in its full complexity and always ask, are there other factors involved? Let's consider some of our causal whys. I often hear cynics simplify a complex value system like consumer culture into an uninformed assumption like people are greedy, lazy, or selfish. The truth of an issue or belief is almost always more complex than we can summarize into a single statement like this. When we reduce and oversimplify, we neglect the nuances of reality. Truly, we could write volumes discussing the massive number of interplaying factors and long standing causal chains that have led us to the modern consumer state. Simplifying this social norm by labeling people as neglectful, lazy, and morally corrupt is a gross oversimplification. And when we grossly oversimplify, we cannot understand the truth of a situation. Without proper understanding, any action plans we create to change the situation will likely fail. So, again, avoid oversimplification and always consider alternative factors and perspectives. All right. Thank you for joining me as we add new tools to our writer's toolbox. I hope you found today's video insightful. Let us know what tools or topics you would like us to cover in future videos in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more writing tools. Until next time, stay interested so that you can stay interesting.